Good morning, fellas. Here we are. And thanks for thanks for joining in, each of you, this morning's session. I guess we can, you know why we're here. Let's just dive right in. Last time in our time, we examined Jesus. He acknowledged his troubled soul, and we're all aware of that, primarily from what occurred in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is actually quite earlier than that. It falls right after the triumphal entry where John inserts it. But what's unique about John is he turns the troubled soul, showing Jesus how quickly he steers his feeling, his inward troubledness to purpose. And that's what we looked at last week. We talked about God being glorified again and again. That's a direct quote where God speaks from the voice of heaven. We also talked about what I'm calling the gavel of judgment and how that relates to the ruler of this world. We talked quite a bit about the ruler of this world and how to understand that. This short section that we looked at last week, it's really got a lot in it. It can affect how we believe and how we interact with life and other people. Our practice as on the journey. This is the text for today. We're going to go from 1234 through 36a, and I'm ending it at 36a for a specific purpose, because on 36b it changes, and it talks about how Jesus is forced into hiding, and we'll look at that next week. Verse 34, the crowd then answered him, we have heard from the law that the Christ is to remain forever. And how is it that you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? So Jesus said to them, for a little while longer, the light is among you. Walk while you have the light, so that the darkness will not overtake you. Also, the one who walks in darkness does not know where he's going. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become sons of light. I love that last phrase. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become sons of light. A little poetry there. Seems like. Let's take a look. First of all, 1234 is this question brought to Jesus by this crowd. And there's the text. I won't read it. We just read it. And then that's the question. To this audience that brought the question, the law of Moses, which would be the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and I would say fairly close to what we recognize as the first 5 books. This audience, this section of scripture is God's instruction manual for his people. They high regard. Therefore, a high regard was placed upon searching these scriptures to discover what the law stated, because the people wanted to comply with God's intent. That was their understanding. So we need to know what God is saying in and through the law of Moses. The difficulty in this whole task, or this whole way of thinking, was that the people had a hard time coming to consensus. Thus, what happened, especially during the New Testament times, there are many schools of thought in regard to what God wants from his people. That was their, what school of thought are you, would be the way these people were thought. Well, this one group of people came to Jesus with this question. In our story, this crowd, with their version of this is how it is, theologically, They've got presuppositions and they've got their views and bents and so forth of what the law of Moses is saying. They came to Jesus with a question. They stated their perspective regarding the Christ. They understood the Christ as one who would come to save them from their life troubles, and then primarily in reference to the Roman domination. This was a major theme in all of the New Testament, early first century church believers, or Jews rather. Some believers, some not. The crowd names this Savior as the Christ, and that's the Greek term, which was a common way to speak of the expected Messiah, and that's the Hebrew term. I think you guys are all aware of that. This crowd makes an astute observation, and here is the observation in the question. There's three parts. One is, first, they are collectively exploring the idea that Jesus is this expected one, this Christ, this Messiah, that's on their roadmap. Secondly, they hear Jesus, when he's speaking, he speaks of himself as the Son of Man. And that's, I did a quote here, one of many quotes in chapter 12, verse 23. They would have made the correlation to Son of Man as described in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And in the book of Daniel, the Son of Man, he is the one that goes into the realm of the Ancient of Days, representative of God, and receives a kingdom that will last forever. So it's a very, very important text. And it's my belief that these people would have made that correlation when Jesus is talking about the Son of Man. Thirdly, they then hear through Jesus that this Son of Man is to be lifted up. That really put them on tilt. 1232 is the reference. They also would have made the correlation to, and this is my opinion, I think they would have made the correlation to Moses's action in the wilderness as described in Numbers 21. You know, the staff, the serpent on the stick. At minimum, if that's not true, at least at minimum, this crowd understood Jesus's words as disruptive to the eternal reign of the Christ. They however they interpreted it, if they didn't interpret it through Numbers 21, somehow what Jesus was saying really disrupted or was not in line with their theological understanding. And so this raised huge red flags for them. They started with a reasoning and they went down that path. And at the end, they were on tilt regarding what Jesus was saying. And so understandably, from their perspective, they respond with the question, well, who is this Son of Man? They're trying to get a handle on it, trying to get their arms around this question, who is this Son of Man? Which would have been informed by Daniel 7. They're all looking for a savior. They're all looking. So Jesus has three responses to their question. And here's the 35a. So Jesus said to them, first of all, a little while longer, the light is among you. He goes and starts talking about light. Walk while you have the light, so the darkness will not overtake you. Their concern, of course, going back, their concern is, well, who is this Son of Man? They raised the question. To them, having their doctrinal ducks neatly aligned was of major importance. That is noteworthy because it reveals their reasoning process. They are all about having it all in line, how it should be. And I call them doctrinal ducks. Jesus, within that context, this is also noteworthy. He redirects their theological concerns to the here and now. He brings they want to have the right grid, the right frame of thinking, and Jesus redirects that thought into walking in light here and now. I think it's safe to assume that the crowd understood Jesus as talking about himself as being the light. Now, that is my assumption. The reason I have this assumption is because there's absolutely no questionable practice by Jesus as in regard to lifestyle. In other words, Jesus is talking about himself as the light. He's pointing the crowd to himself as the light. And the reason he could do that is because his lifestyle was generally accepted as light worthy. He was a great example of how to live life, and he's pointing other people to that. And the reason I believe that is there's absolutely no questionable practice by Jesus in regard to his lifestyle. I don't know if anybody's ever criticized anything in the documented evidences that we have that Jesus had a questionable lifestyle. People don't go down that road. So there's no questionable practice, nor is there any pushback towards Jesus in regard to his lifestyle. Nobody says, well, if you're the light, then why do you do this? That never has come up. He's recognized as light worthy, an example worthy to follow. The only pushback to this assumption was by the religious authority, in that Jesus ate with tax gatherers and sinners. They didn't like that. And because from their theological perspective, that these people were considered outsiders. They weren't worthy of this. And Jesus was, if he were a true religious leader, he wouldn't be rubbing shoulders with these people considered as outsiders. Therefore, just a moment, Bill. Therefore, the only notable objection to Jesus's lifestyle was by the religious sector, and for the reason they thought Jesus was too inclusive. Jesus was too inclusive. They didn't like that. They also did criticize him, I think, in the early chapters of Mark, for eating with tax gatherers and sinners, and also eating with wine bibbers, they called it in the King James. So it's the religious authority that really pushed back. They thought Jesus was too cushy, too inclusive. Yeah, Bill.
I see that, although I do remember where Mary and his brothers thought he was nuts and went to get him.
Oh, the family, yeah.
Yeah, and then John the Baptist had some questions too, but he answered them.
Yeah. So there are some other, good examples. There are some others as well. His family. I didn't think about that, Bill. That's exactly right. His family they thought he was nuts. Yeah. I got a quick pick in my teeth. Thank you for that. With the assumption that the crowd understands that he's talking about himself, he directs them to actually follow his example. That's, I think, pretty important. He says, walk as he walked, or walk as I walk. He's saying, in doing so, they will be able to negotiate the nuances of the path as dark as the darkness of night encroaches. Now, I had a thought. If the folks at what's the series we like? The Chosen. If those folks got a hold of this, I think they would cast this as Jesus is walking with his disciples, as we've seen several times. And the crowd is coming in, and this scene is taking place at sunset. The night is starting to encroach, and I think it's fun to imagine how they would cast this. I bet they really have fun doing this when they're going through this, in order to make it more meaningful about light and darkness. That's just my thought. So his second response is 35b, and there we got it underlined. Also, the one who walks in darkness does not know where he is going, is a follow-up to 35a. The reason to follow Jesus as the light is because there is no viable alternative. That is really important. And think about it in our modern way of thinking. You know, you and I either have a flashlight or we don't. You know, if we get up in the tent in the middle of the night and it's a really dark night out, it's a good idea to have a flashlight. If you got to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, it's good to have a little flashlight. Otherwise, it's hard to find the tent zipper door and get out and stumble around and all that stuff. Without a flashlight while in the dark, the probability for successful navigation moves to close to zero. It's really tough. And so that's what he's saying is if you the one who walks in darkness without a flashlight, he doesn't know where he's going. That's exactly true. What Jesus has demonstrated in inviting the crowd into is light. This is about light. The alternative is a self-created, bruise-prone existence marked by overwhelming frustration. We either follow the light or we don't. And that's what he's saying. He's inviting them into the light, and he's made the correlation, from my perspective, that he is the light. Follow him. Response 3, while you have the light, here's the conclusion. While you have the light, believe in the light so that you may become sons of light. That's I really like that. His third and final response to this, what I'm calling an astute and seeking crowd, you know, that's where I've categorized these people, is the promise connected to following him. That's where he concludes. As one follows, one becomes what they follow. And I think I got it. Yep, that's a universal truth. We become what we follow. That's universal truth. If I follow my self-created, this is the way, I become more of the same, because I'm just reflecting me back to me. It's like we have a mirror, we're holding it up in our hands, and we're looking at me in the mirror, and I'm looking for answers. That's what we're doing. And that otherwise, we lay the mirror down and we walk in the light. We do his thing. And I think I got that here. In contrast, if I follow him, who is the light, I become a son of light for other people. That is really good, real critical. There is a purpose in my following. My purpose does not make Jesus happy, uh, or my following doesn't make Jesus happy that I'm walking down the right path. It happens to be what actually exists, and it gives me a much better existence, and it points other people in the correct in a much better existence as well. That's a loose uh, observation. Summary number one, he says, follow my example as you observe how I live right here and right now. I really, guys, this is where I'm landing. I think Jesus's lifestyle is an example to you and I. I think we are to follow him, and that means actually live the kind of life, say the kind of things, do the kind of actions that he did, and it's reflective of his relationship with his Father, and it's right here and now. The alternative to that, number one, is a self-created, what I'm calling, I lifted this out of the text before, out of my comments. The alternative is a self-created, bruise-prone existence marked by overwhelming frustration. It's something that I create in my head, and I'm going to live under that, not let go of that, and it just creates havoc for myself and the people around me. Number three, and this is the speaking in the first person. If you, Jesus speaking, if you follow me, Jesus speaking, you will become like me for other people. Thus, our call, our mission, our purpose here is to be light for other people. That's the kind of men we want to be. So, table time, we got really a lot of good time to talk about this. In this session, we've examined the words of Jesus in response to an astute theological question. His response is clearly instructional, but it's different than what they ask. He points his questioners to follow him, who Jesus is referring to as light. He takes a theological question up here, and he switches that, redirects that to the here and now about following light, following him as light. The outcome is that as they follow, they will become sons of light. That's a really interesting phrase. Would like to talk about that. So here's the question that I'll throw out there, and then we can, do with this what we want. So, what does it look like from our own experiences? What does it look like for a person to be a son of light? What's characteristic of that person's words and actions? How does that person respond while in day-to-day pressure, difficulty, and conflict? And then finally, do you and I know any people like that? Or how do we think about that? So, what are your thoughts?
Hey, Mike, could you go back one page on your screen, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
And I'll put it out there in its full glory. Okay, is that what you wanted, Dave?
Yeah, thanks.
Did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, what struck me I've got a situation in my personal life to which this is with another individual, and this is so apropos. Led me to summarize those three things is Jesus had a knack for listening to people ask the wrong questions, but then he would give the right answers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true. Yeah. Interesting. I think you referred to it as a wrong question. This would be a question that I would be really interested in. You know, this whole, how do we understand this? And I too think it's really interesting, his response in that. It's an answer, it's not an ignorance. And I think I think that makes a big difference. Other thoughts? Yeah, Bill.
Well, this goes back to what's kind of been guiding my life is the idea of orthopraxy, or how to live. And because if you try to use the Bible as what to do, you're going to try to fit old stuff onto new situations that may not have any commonality. But if you take how you're supposed to live and respond to it, that's kind of an eternal guideline all the way into the future. And that's why I've gotten so upset a lot of times with politics and some Christianity, where they go, the ends justifies the means. The ends are getting our way legally with this, this, and this. And if we have to lie, cheat, or deceive to get it, it's worth it. And I go like, no. This is how you live is all important. And what you accomplish is up to God. And I find that both comforting and a guideline for who to follow.
I do too. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a question in regard to that. You know, the orthopraxy, which is definitely what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about following, walking, light, darkness. That's that's day to day, moment by moment, walking down a path of light, and adhering to that light in times of great darkness, in times of great need. That's really far different than, that's way different than much of my Christian upbringing. Although I'm not I'm not critical of that. I'm grateful for that. But the emphasis over and over of having the correct avenue of thinking, and within our Protestant realm that we're all of us attend in the Protestant sector, there are diverse beliefs of that whole thing. And that seems to be the point of adherence. But here, Jesus is clearly, I mean, this is one of many examples, taking that, diffusing that whole way of thinking. He's diffusing a way of thinking and redirecting their thoughts to the here and now. Is that, I see that really, really different. So the question in my mind, what does that look like in our day-to-day, assuming this is for you and I, what does this look like?
Well, there's kind of almost on the tail end of all of Paul's epistles is behavior adjustment, advice to you how to get along, forgive someone, do this, don't do that. They look like rules, but they're basically guidelines for how to live. You can pick out most any epistle, First Corinthians 13 or the end of Romans. He tells people how to get along.
I think the opening verses of Philippians 2, again, the mind of Christ, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. That is what we are to mimic, is the mind of Christ, and to seek that. And in my life, I've got daily opportunities to not do that. Maybe a better way to do that would be daily opportunities to do that. to function and it always involves a letting go of what I want at that moment. I don't know, what do you got? What are the rest of you? What are your thoughts? Can I move this slide now, Dave?
Yeah, thanks.
So Bill, right after in John 3, right after and Moses lifted up the servant in the wilderness, Jesus is talking to Nicodemus. Even so, the Son of Man must be lifted up. So he had that conversation with Nicodemus, but then a couple verses later, he said, and this is the judgment, that the light is come into the world, and men love the darkness rather than the light, and their deeds were evil. And everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who practices truth comes to the light. So this idea that your orthopraxy, right? We're so into believing the right stuff, but you're saying it's more than believing the right stuff. You got to not only believe the right stuff, you got to have a transformed life. You got to be doing your actions need to be doing that. Yeah, so this whole thing reminds me of John 1, that whole prologue. So in him was life, and the life was the light of men.
Yeah.
Light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't get it, does not comprehend it.
Yeah, that's good, John.
This all kind of, Mike, goes back to this. You keep saying all the time about living in the present, the right here and now.
Yeah, I say that a lot.
Yeah. Probably because we grew up thinking our faith journey was this little short hop in the here and now, and that it's really all about the here, the after we die kind of thing, so we tend to throw that out, and we're stuck in the here and now. But Jesus is definitely talking about that. I have been contemplating a thing that St. Clare has said, and it's similar to your statement that if we follow him, we become like him, right? And so St. Clare said, we become what we love. Who we love shapes what we become. So we become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become. And I think that's, what should I say, another slant on this whole thing about being in the light and how do you become light.
Yeah.
And I would say part of it is, a mind thing and our deeds and actions. But another part is this transformation that Jesus keeps talking about, another dimension of something that is going to radically transform us, which is he himself. So, so I think that follows closely, or just as another slant, saying the same thing you're saying. If we follow him, I think if we follow him with the whole intent of just trying to mimic what he did, I think that can become it's like taking the Sermon on the Mount and saying, I'm going to try much harder to be much, much better and much more like this. And that can become pretty frustrating after a short amount of time. It's more than that. So are we loving the right thing, right? Are we loving the right person? And will that transform us into something else, right? Light.
Yeah. Can any of you think of either a time in, from your own experience where you've seen a person respond in the light, what it feels like, what it looks like, what it sounds like? Bill, you talk about orthopraxy and you made references to stuff that doesn't reflect doesn't reflect sons of light. What does it look like on a day-to-day in our lives? What does it look like to be a son of light? Can you think
Well,
of an example? Or
yeah,
somebody-
I've got a concern on top of that too, because orthopraxy, I think we have to be careful that it doesn't become tribal. I think of one time years ago when they had the big Katrina flood in New Orleans, one of our linemen, I hope that printer something, my wife's printing something. Anyway, one of our linemen went down there and helped out a bunch and did a slideshow when he came back. But when you started realizing he was a Jehovah's Witness and they were going down helping out the Jehovah's Witnesses with their church. And I kind of asked him, I said, do you help anyone else? And he said, oh no, we went down for our church. And Mormons kind of do that too. But I know there's this unofficial team of Mennonites that gets dispatched to trouble, disaster areas and does a lot of work, and they do it without any kind of tribal alliances, just whoever needs the help and stuff. So I think I have to add that little piece to it, to not make it tribal. I don't know how important that is, but it's interesting that I want to make sure Christians don't become real tribal in who they help. They help people, period.
Yeah. Right. Yes, that's another good example. I mean, hopefully our thinking can be broader than that. Other thoughts, guys? You think of an example, or maybe how your life has changed or your thoughts have changed in this.
I think we can sort of wrestle with this, and maybe our tendency, or I'll own it as my tendency, is to come up with a list of, I'll just call them Christian markers.
Yeah.
As to what it looks like. And maybe in contrast to having a list of Christian markers and sort of judging myself or judging those around me and how many boxes I tick on a Christian markers checklist, more to say, I think I guess I'll just call it, our spirits respond when we are around someone who's walking in the light. We know it when we see it. I can think of an example of being around someone who was harmed by another person fairly substantially in terms of financial hit and some things like that. And being around that person and it seemed like there was no stream of bitterness or rancor flowing out of the person and talking about some of the things that had happened that had been harmful and so on. And I look at something like that and I go, there's light here.
Yeah,
it's not
agreed.
You know it when you know it.
Yeah. That's a great example, Steve. And I would call that, seeing that is it would draw me into grace, love, life, the absence of bitterness, when bitterness could be there, is a life-giving, that is being a son of light, and it's providing light for me at that very moment. Is that what you're saying? Is that
a good summary? Yeah.
It has
it's motivating, it's life-giving.
Yeah, it's something I want to be a part of. It's something that I gravitate for. It's like I'm trying to not use the word supernatural, but it's supernatural. And I think that's a great example. Yeah.
I have a problem with the word light because it's clearly a metaphor. It's not illumination. And then I have to stick on, how do I define light?
Oh,
I
good
get the,
question.
yeah, and I think at this point I defined it, for me, I defined it as kindness. I'm drawn to kindness.
Yeah.
That works for me. It could be other words too.
Yeah, kindness is a great word. Kara, I think her name was Kara Tippett. She was dying of cancer, Colorado Springs here, probably 10, 15 years ago. And when the internet and blogging had just become, important, it was during her journey of dying. And she would say the biggest word she would bring up was this idea of kindness, right? That would be reflective of somebody that had been with Jesus. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Bill,
Bill,
the idea of light is really interesting too. One of the things I love about Colorado is the sun shines so often, right? I mean, you live here, you take it for granted. Even on a cloudy day like today, you watch the sun will come out a little bit sometime. Being back east, we'd have days on end, kind of like Seattle, where it would be just dark, gray. But being in the light, standing in the sunshine, not only feels good.
Oh, it does.
There's just more to it. So, Mike, I would chastise you and say, hey, don't be afraid to use the word supernatural.
Yeah.
I think Tim Keller,
right.
Yeah, I think Tim Keller would say that if there's not a supernatural part to this spiritual journey, then we're missing the boat, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've all come from a place where maybe it was too supernatural, where it was too much talk of heaven and hell, right? Yeah. So the pendulum swings this other way, but yeah.
I think what I agree. It's my issue with the word, not the word, but what Steve was talking about was a supernatural drawing. Bill was talking about light. I tend to look at this term light as how it would be depicted in some of the mid-century artwork, where the person of Jesus is, or holy people are depicted with a halo around their head, a glow, a certain glow. I don't think it like that anymore. I think light is more like a flashlight. It directs our footpath. It gives us clarity. It gives us direction, a meaning, purpose, in order to move in a difficult and dark-ridden place. Similar to what Steve's example, or exactly like what Steve was saying earlier.
Well, that's like advice, good advice. You're in a dark area, you don't know what to do, and someone gives you advice that gives you your next step. I guess that's light.
Yeah.
I think oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
the
Steve.
Supernatural part of it, something that Miriam and I have wrestled with. We are surrounded, I'll be blunt here, we're surrounded by neighbors that I would consider to be, I don't know how else to say it, but very liberal. I don't see any evidence of them with the Christian marker of church attendance in any regular way. But in a sense, they're walking in the light. Their children are not the ones throwing rocks at windows, and so on and so forth. They're good parents. They're good neighbors. They care for other people. They care for us as neighbors. So, Miriam and I've wrestled with sort of, they look like they're walking in the light in terms of advice for living. They're successful in our culture, in our town, in our state. So what is the difference there? I just throw that out. We've tried to figure that out. I can't really, we've had people say, well, you don't have to say anything to to sort of evangelize. They'll see your life and start asking why. And I think these neighbors, they see our lives. We get together with them periodically out in the yard on our lawn chairs and share drinks and that kind of stuff. I don't think they have any reason to question what motivates us. So what is the light there, you know?
Are they Presbyterian?
I don't know what to do except to laugh.
That kind of brings up.
We don't use that kind of language here.
I think.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is that the characteristic that we have that is really not light, but a lot of times happens in church and in Christians, is we judge. Okay, in other words, we're bringing a light on, in a sense, we're bringing a light onto people's behavior, and what we really need to look for, I think, to become sons of light is, for me, it's actually two characteristics. One, the major one, is actually being a person that loves other people, okay, and also that also forgives other people. Characteristics of Jesus, who is our illustration of somebody that is walking in the light. And the example I'm thinking of is when the guy that actually, when I was a young believer or an early believer, I wasn't young, was a guy who I met in Madison on the first Promise Keepers meeting, on the bus of the first Promise Keepers, as we were moving out of Madison to go to Indianapolis. And there's this guy staring at me, okay? And it turns out that he was staring at me because his wife said, "John, when you get on that bus, don't sit with somebody that you know." So I went over there and I asked him, "Why are you staring at me?" And he said, "Well, he told me about his wife, saying so we got to know each other." And it turns out this was his second wife, who was actually, he was white and she was black, kind of a thing. And it turns out his history was his first wife and he were doing a prison ministry, and his wife divorced him, okay, for to get involved with one of the prisoners that they were talking to, okay. And so he got deposed as the chairman of the board of this particular church, and he ended up actually going to this black church, okay. So anyway, to me, he had no bitterness against her. He was totally forgiving, and then I got into this atmosphere of being in a black church, and having been saved actually in a Southern Baptist church that was all white and whatever. So to me, he was an illustration of not only of primarily love, but also of forgiveness. I mean, he didn't have any bitterness towards his first wife, and how many of us can say that? So anyway, he to me was somebody that was walking in the light. Okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like Vince.
I'm reminded,
Well.
you guys that know me for a while know I get wrapped around an axle with analogies every now and then, but I keep thinking about the question and the essence of the light, of Yeshua being the light, Jesus being the light, which never fades, never goes out, battery never dies, whatever you want to say about it, it's there. What this is reminding me of is when we find ourselves in this world, in these dark situations, and it might be face to face with a really, really dark, ugly situation. But even as we're in that darkness, we can see his light. It's there. It's through, or it's beyond the other side of what it is that we're in the midst of. And to me, that's an encouragement reminding us that, and I know this is all in scripture too, but no matter how ugly things get, no matter what someone is spewing in your face, no matter what animosity is being thrown at you or whatever, as believers, we have to remember and continue to look and know that that light is there. And when we see that light, then it changes our response. It changes the way we react to what's going on.
That well said, Dave. Really well said. Exactly.
I would like to go back to Steve's thing and Dave or whoever, but so when you see other people acting like Christians who definitely aren't followers of Jesus, does that upset your apple cart?
Used to.
It doesn't upset my apple cart in that this may be a blasphemy, okay?
Oh,
Blasphemer.
Okay.
Turn off the recorder.
Hopefully lightning doesn't strike, but go ahead.
Well, the scripture about no one comes, to whatever, to being saved except, if they, because Jesus is the only light, okay, to salvation. Now, I know people that aren't Christians that, and the one I think of most personally is my grandmother, who was a Shintoist, but she brought up her kids in a Christian household and allowed them there. But my middle brother remembers her saying, she wouldn't let us kill a mouse because it might be somebody, an ancestor kind of thing.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, and that was one of the three big questions I had when I was, being listened to by the pastor in Burserville, who listened to me, and that was one of my big three questions: is what happens to my grandmother, who I looked at as a person of great love, who was walking, if you will, in the light, but she wasn't necessarily in the quotes, a believer of Christ. And my feeling back then, when I was not a believer, was I didn't want to be in heaven if she wasn't in heaven. Bingo. So anyway, when I accepted Christ, and he asked me, he said, "Well, what about the question about your grandmother?" I said, "Well, God is a loving God, a God of love, and I will just place her in God's hands." And I've known other people like that are, like Steve was describing, are good people, don't necessarily specifically believe in Christ, but if they're good people, and I'm not to judge them, just speak on the basis of whether they are, I would leave that judgment to God, okay, and leave him to, being a God of love who's not going to, throw people in hell that shouldn't be in hell, okay. So anyway, that's my blasphemy statement.
Richard Rohr's universal Christ is growing on me as we approach these things, where he's incarnate everywhere, and we can spot him in your grandmother or your neighbors, as opposed to binary thinking, saying, well, they haven't come forward and confessed the right confession, and therefore God doesn't love them, he's going to punish them. I don't buy that anymore.
Well, thanks, Bill. Yeah.
So another question, would be what would Jesus, say about these things? And, you know, we like Richard Rohr, we like these other people, and we like, you know, and we've come out of these boxes where we put God in this box, and maybe we've come from the right, which says you've got to have this you got to say the sinner's prayer. It's got to be a transactional kind of a arrangement with God. But in turn, you know, how would Jesus answer Steve's concern about his neighbor being good? Who upset Jesus when he was walking, you know, on the earth?
He said, "Who's not against me is for me." I mean, and I'm cherry picking scriptures, but there's echoes of that.
Yeah. So part of my, I mean, it's obvious that Jesus says we're to love our neighbor and get with the program, right? And we're to love ourselves because he loved us, right? And the things that Mike says in the here and now, I mean, it's obvious that that is a major focus, but we tend to just hold on to the things we like. I mean, he said things like, how hard is it for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? He said a ton of stuff that is not warm and fuzzy. And he said it basically to the people that today, if they were here today, the Pharisees, etc., we would hold them in high esteem. Good people, you know, good religious people doing the right thing.
Only simply stated, Jesus says, love others, love the Father, and love others as the Father has loved me, and love yourself, and leave the rest to me.
Do the two.
Yeah.
Well, he says that, but he gives us lots of other kicks in the butt, let's say, to say there's more to it than that. So back to Steve's question, you know, is there more to our faith journey than us just being good people and loving our neighbor? I mean,
You know, I hate to say it. I think there isn't much more than that.
There is or isn't?
Isn't.
Yeah, that's. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we tell people why we do it. I mean, that what motivates us, and we go forward. And instead of handing out pamphlets on the corner, we wait for people to open doors and say, "How can you live like this?" And of course, like Steve said, if he asked his neighbors, "How do you live like this?" they probably would say, "It's the way my parents raised me," or something. I think if you scratch in the past somewhere, I have to believe a lot of people who behave good, you go back far enough, somewhere was a Christian influence that carried through, but I can't prove that.
I think that it's a question of we can't judge whether that person is going to go to heaven or not. We have to leave that to God and to Jesus. Okay, it's for those good people. That's my thought on it. On what Steve was saying.
You know, we're going to wrap up, guys. Thank you. You know, we're really touching on some very sensitive and mind expanding or difficult things to talk about. The thing that I leave with each of us today is, you know, each of us here on this Zoom, we've been taught a certain way to think about certain things. John, hard sayings, for your example. It might be good for us to think about how we think about those things. And I'll leave you with that. Have a good day, guys. And listen, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. So I'll be gone for the next 2 weeks. I'll be back on the 31st. But you guys just continue on. And I think you always find stuff to talk about. Maybe you can talk about how you think about what you think about.
Mike? Say Mike?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm now, when I get to the 31st, I'll be gone at my other men's group up in North Dakota. So you have a good summer. Oh,
Bill, you have a good summer too. Enjoy your group. That's a wonderful thing you guys do. And, you know, if you can join us, you know how to get on.
Yeah, I sure do.
So.
Okay.
All right. Well, goodbye, everybody. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks then.
Okay.
Bye for
Good,
now.
Mike. Thanks.
Bye.